Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. Let everyone roll in.
Hello, hello. We will get started in just a moment. Happy Friday, everybody. Natalie, would you say we've got just about everybody?
I think we are good to go.
Okay. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayana Davis. I will be your host today. Welcome to Cultures of Belonging with Alida Miranda-Wolff. I'm excited to have her here as a host and hear what she has to say. But a quick intro, Alida is the CEO and founder of Ethos and author of the book Cultures of Belonging, Building Inclusive Organizations That Last. Alida received her certification in diversity, equity, and inclusion from Georgetown University and has 8 years of experience. In 2021, Alida was a recipient of UChicago's Early Career Achievement Award. And by helping organizations and the people inside of them understand their relationships with power, how to use their power responsibly, and how to share their power, Alida helps create the conditions for everyone to thrive at work. And today she will be helping us learn how to do that for ourselves. And just really quickly, this presentation is being recorded. After Alida's presentation, we'll have time for a Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A. If you want to learn more about Alida's work after this session, please check out her upcoming 2-day accelerator session, Cultures of Belonging, Creating Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategies and Initiatives Accelerator. It'll be March 9th and 10th in a couple months. March is much closer than I thought it was. But here you can learn how to design a DEIB strategy that maximizes impact for your organization. And because you are here today, Alida has gifted us with a lovely code that you can use to get $100 off your ticket. I'll put that code in now. It is Ethos Friends. And I'll be sure to send out the link for her accelerator at the end of our session today and in our resource email that comes out in a couple days. And so without further ado, I will hand things over to Alida.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. I know that some of you are familiar to me. I think at least 2 of you I saw at the University of Chicago's book club event last week, so it's wonderful to see you back again for more. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of today, so I'm going to share a little bit more about my ethos, not just my organization, but my way of looking at the world. And then I want to talk a little bit more about the intersectional issues that we face in achieving belonging, especially in hybrid environments, and what we can do specifically when we think about culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to get to a place that feels right for the majority of us who want to be part of these communities. We'll be using my framework, R2P2, to think through structures, and we'll also be looking at measurement and how we measure the impact of what it is we're putting in place. With that said, I wanted to share a little bit of my background as it relates to the University of Chicago. So my name is Alida Miranda-Wolff. I identify as a white-passing Latina cisgender woman with an invisible disability. I am a second-generation immigrant. I am a new parent, and I strongly identify with my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I graduated from the University of Chicago in 2014. I double majored in English, language and literature, and law letters and society, and I minored in romance languages. And while I was at the University of Chicago, I had a lot of experiences that ultimately shaped the way that I think about work and the world that we play in when it comes to work. The very first English literature class that I took was Morrison, Walker, Lord, so Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, and Audre Lorde. And one of the first readings for that class was from the Combahee River Collective statement on thinking through the full emancipation of everyone, especially within the US, and what that would look like and mean for it to happen, really looking at root causes. And so when I think about belonging and I think about our workplaces today, it's very much coming from this thread and this lens of how do we think about adversity as not something to perform, to display, to use as a form of social capital or credibility, but instead as a bridge of thinking through how we can come together and see intersectionality for what it is, that there's not one single issue struggle because we don't lead single issue lives. And when we're talking about work, that is very much the case as well. We can't compartmentalize ourselves and keep the world of work separate from our larger ecosystems. So a few things in terms of our connections. I was in this photo receiving an award from the University of Chicago, the Early Career Achievement Award. And the reason that I posted this here is I had had a traumatic birth experience and had had a C-section. I had lost 30% of all of the blood in my body in under 2 minutes, and I still went to this awards ceremony. And one of the reasons why, apart from my commitment to the University of Chicago, was because when I think about the importance of solidarity and coalition, the folks who were there were very much striving towards this idea. And that's been a lot of the relationships I've had through the university, of really thinking through how do we make something greater than ourselves that ultimately allows for us to achieve change. And then as an alumnus of the university, I have actually participated in 3 different career month programs, all on different topics, all through different careers. The very first one that I led was talking about what it was like to be in venture capital, because at the time I had been the only woman working in my VC firm, the only person who was Latin A working in VC in Chicago, one of 27 Latina women in the US working in VC. And then, of course, I was also at that time the youngest person working in a director role by 10 years. So this is a very different conversation than the one that I had 7 years ago, but one that I'm excited to have nevertheless. So with all of that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say cultures of belonging. And in order to do that, I want to just present a basic definition. I believe that belonging is feeling part of something greater than yourself, that values and respects you, and that you value and respect back. There are a lot of definitions of belonging. I've asked people what belonging means to them, and I've heard people say things like, belonging is being my authentic self, or belonging is feeling part of a community, or belonging is acknowledgement. And all of those definitions and experiences are true, ultimately, because belonging is a collective action that requires we experience individual connection. So when we think about belonging and achieving belonging, how do we actually do it? How do we make this happen, especially in a work environment? And I think that it's the 3 R's. So first is relationships. We cannot participate in belonging if we are on our own. Belonging is a fundamentally social concept. We have to have meaningful relationships with other people in order to experience belonging. And I think it's worth noting that when we look at Lydia Dunworth's research on friendship, what contributes to lasting long-term friendships are 3 components. And that's similarity, we have things in common. Proximity, we have been physically close to each other in some context, in some way. And then finally, reciprocity. We feel like there is mutuality, connection, exchange in our relationships. So we need to, in order to feel a strong sense of belonging, feel very connected to other people, to be known and to know is so central to an experience of belonging. And what gets in the way of that? Usually lack of resources. So let's think about this. How can you really be in relationships with other people if you don't have enough time? Or if you don't have energy to commit to listening or being present or showing up? And if we're talking about work, if you don't have a good pay structure in place where people feel like they're paid what they're worth, they're not going to feel a sense of belonging because they're not going to feel valued. So you need resources because relationships are not easy. And relationships, importantly, are not efficient. Relationships require learning, processing, time. They don't operate linearly. We come back to them, we leave them, we recommit to them. And so belonging can sometimes be in tension with productivity, which is why it's so interesting that our workplaces want us to experience a sense of belonging. Because while they may say that, a lot of the questions they ask us and the practices that they want us to adopt may run counter to investing in these relationships or thinking differently about how these resources are used. And of course, the last piece is reciprocity. So you may have noticed in that definition that when we're talking about belonging, you have to value and respect the community that you're part of, and that community has to respect you and value you. And that two-way exchange is not a given. So I'm going to talk about it in a way that I think we often don't talk about belonging, which is I'm part of a community and I don't want to belong to it. Maybe my values don't align. Maybe I'm not proud of the things that we do. Maybe I don't like the other people I'm around. You don't have to want belonging in every context or community that you're part of. But in order to experience belonging, there does have to be that sense of exchange. So when I think about reciprocity, I often think at work, let's talk about layoffs or job loss. If you see 300 people get laid off via a Zoom call, that doesn't feel like value and respect. So that's not only going to impact a sense of belonging to the people who are now leaving that community, but the people who remain. On the flip side, one of the things that we saw in a competitive job market over the last 2 to 3 years is that employees increasingly were leaving their organizations because they didn't want to belong there. So when we talk about belonging, it's a lot more nuanced than folks might initially imagine. It's not a binary. It's not you belong or you don't belong. It's a spectrum. And every context switch we make is a question of what our experience of belonging is and what our relationship to that belonging is. This is important when we think about organizational culture, because belonging and a healthy culture are interconnected, are interlocked. So this definition comes from Joshua Rothman from his essay, The Meaning of Culture. And what he's describing here is a healthy culture. So a group of people discover together a good way of life. And that good way of life expresses itself in their habits, their institutions, their activities, what they do, what they build. And as a result, individuals can flourish in their own ways, but the group also flourishes. And that's really important to keep in mind as we have these conversations around belonging, that this is talking about the relationships between people, the activities that they do, and what people can take away as individuals as they participate in this group. So I want to take a moment, and I want to hear from folks in the room. If you think about the organization that you're part of, how would you describe it in 1 or 2 words? Driven, collaborative, generous, caring, solution-oriented. And what do you think the relationship between your organization's culture and belonging is? Do you see the two happening? Does your organization create a space where you feel you can belong? Happens in pockets. That's that contextual piece coming up, that sense of spectrum. For many, but not for all. Mike, that's really important. We're going to come back to that. Keep thinking about this. Well-intentioned, but not always successful. Right, because when we talk about things like belonging, your relationship to it as an individual is going to be different. So even when we're talking about something like a group, we're going to see multiple experiences at different times in different situations. What we're trying to achieve when we're talking about belonging is a kind of balance that allows for the conditions of belonging to be possible if folks opt in to participate. And a big part of that means understanding the intersectional issues that act on individuals who are going to work. The idea of work-life balance or having a separate life away from work may resonate with some people, but ultimately the way that we talk about our workplaces today, things like hyperconnectivity, working on flexible schedules and irregular hours, means we don't just leave an entire part of ourselves behind when we open up our laptops or we start our days. So we need to be aware of the intersectional issues that are acting on people as they come to work. So there's a term called the cool zone. If folks have been through a session with me on the cool zone before, you will know this term. If folks are on Twitter a lot, like I am, you'll know this term too. So if you know what this is, please chat it in. But the cool zone refers to a period in history in a society where there is the opportunity for radical economic, political, and social change that has the potential to lead to emancipation. Often when people try to think about what the cool zone is, they'll think about the Arab Spring. And I think it's a really good example because we can look at Tunisia and Syria. Tunisia actually achieved that sense of emancipation, and while there is a lot of work left to be done, the project of the Arab Spring and what it was trying to do succeeded. When we talk about Syria, that's not the case. So the cool zone does not mean that we are going to see positive transformational changes. It just means we have the possibility of it. And why it's relevant to us today is many theorists believe that the United States is currently in the cool zone because of a variety of major social issues that have arisen in the last 5 to 10 years. And the three that are most important and relevant, especially when we think about how people are showing up at work, are public health, the economy, and public safety. So when we think about public health, we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're also talking about access to hospitals, healthcare, medicine, things that ultimately support people's health. So for example, I talked about my traumatic birth experience. The US has the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed nation in the world. So that would fall into this public health bucket, especially given the fact that folks in the last 10 years have been much more vocal about maternal health and maternal mortality with the COVID-19 pandemic. And even looking at that intersection with the economy, we can look at the job market which has been relatively tight, the labor market specifically. There have been more jobs than there are people to fill them in terms of public health. So because of COVID-19 and the amount of people who were removed from the workforce, either because of death or long COVID creating disability that prevents them from working, that's where we saw that crunch come from. We can also think about the economy in terms of boom or bust cycles relative to how much money people have or don't have, what employment rates are. And all of these things start to look a little bit different when you start to apply social identity to the picture as well. This is, of course, true of public safety when we talk about whether we think our institutions or infrastructures keep us safe and how we respond based on who we are. But the reason these circles are so important when we think about work is we don't know what people are coming in with, and therefore we don't know what people expect when they're at work. So I may be coming to my job, and my partner has been affected by a layoff, but folks on the team don't know that. And that affects my sense of connection, community, belonging, my presence in this space. Or when we talk about mental health concerns, something that I think is so interesting is we've talked as a broader society about the need for mental health resources and support. And something that's been revealed is that in the last 3 years, the overall suicide rate has declined, not increased. Except if you look at the data, the overall suicide rate has declined amongst people who identify as white and increased amongst people of color. So this is something worth noting also in our work environments when we say, well, this problem has significantly abated, or we've seen this challenge is reduced, or people feel really safe coming into work now, being in the office. We have to keep in mind that it's not so simple as that, and we're just in a space of major transformation. It's why if you look at the recent future of work postings and what employees are feeling in their needs from work, the number one word is stability. Because socially we feel unstable, we're looking to our workplaces to create stability. And the operative word there being looking. We want to close the gap between expectation and experience. And this is critical to achieving a sense of belonging. So to make sure that we're all on the same page about our key terms, I like to show this pyramid. The first part of the pyramid is diversity. So when we talk about diversity, all we mean is variety in a given setting. That's it. Variety of social identities, variety of the people in the room. You can see it, it's an outcome. It's at the bottom of the pyramid because the truth is, when it comes to belonging, we can achieve belonging pretty naturally and inherently if we're all the same. Belonging is a harder project if there is difference in our groups. And when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that's why belonging is at the top of the pyramid. So first we need to have baseline diversity, and then we need to acknowledge that because we have so much difference within our group, we have a distribution of advantage and disadvantage that is not equal. All equity is creating a sense of equal access and meeting individual need. So the example I like to give here is of corporate retreat that I was involved with. This was an organization that had been remote for 2.5 years. And then they started to talk about bringing everyone together for one big event. So they were going to have this big offsite and all of the expenses would be covered. Everyone would be coming to it. And everyone was given a company t-shirt and they were supposed to be in the team photo wearing the t-shirt. One of the managers emailed me to say, I have an issue. My direct report is saying that she won't appear in the photo, or if she does, she won't be wearing the t-shirt. She'll be wearing her own clothes. And I don't know how to deal with this. So I asked him, well, did you ask her why? And he said he hadn't. And so I asked her why. And she said, the largest size available is extra large, and I wear an extra, extra, extra large. So in this situation, we have equal access. Everybody gets a t-shirt, but we don't have individual need met. which means we can't all participate. And so the manager, of course, felt terrible, and he was saying, you know, I didn't want her to feel excluded or rejected. That was an oversight on our part. We need to think differently about how we order our swag in the future. I'm going to apologize to her. I'm going to figure out another solution. And all of that was lovely. What I was thinking about, though, was she was the only person on his team who identified as a woman, who identified as Black, and who identified as that size. If she doesn't appear in the photo, are folks really going to be thinking it's because she didn't have a t-shirt that fit for her? Or are they going to be thinking that it's because she's hard to work with? Or she doesn't have company spirit? Or she's disengaged? It has really reverberating consequences, this exclusion. And so equity is about balancing those things. Once we can create that sense of balance, then we can achieve inclusion, feeling really welcomed, invited in, like the people in our group want us to be there. It's very difficult to feel included in a group photo if you're the only one who doesn't have a t-shirt that fits. Inclusion is the first step in terms of that sense of positive outcome from employees. Cultural awareness is how we deepen it, how we make it mature, how we move beyond a sense of starting this process and really being in it. Cultural awareness is appreciation. It's being able to both understand other people and appreciate them for whatever background they're coming from. One of the key skills of cultural awareness is the ability to adapt to different cultural contexts. If we're not able to adapt to different cultural contexts, what will happen is that folks will feel pressured to cover, pressured to pass as other identities, play down what they may consider to be disfavored identities. Once all of those parts of the pyramid are achieved, then we can get to belonging. And belonging is really what I think of as collective actualization. If the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization, the top of our DEIB pyramid is collective actualization. So with those definitions, we can start to look at what do we do? We want to create cultures of belonging. We want to foster environments where people can feel that they belong and not be excluded from that sense of belonging because of the identities they hold. So R2P2 is my model. It's in the book, Cultures of Belonging, as well. And the idea is, at work, we can look at 4 basic pillars to both diagnose where we are and strategize where we could be in the future. Recruiting is everything that brings someone into an organization, from how a job is conceived of to where it's posted, how it's written, what the interview process is like, all the way through the last day of onboarding. Retention, which I'm going to be honest, isn't my favorite word because it feels kind of like a trap. But let's think about this as this is the step where employees feel engaged and committed to the organization. It may include things like leave policies or training or community building. It might include things like mentorship. But the point being, this is a category of what makes an employee feel like they want to be here. Promotion is how they grow. And that can be laterally, that can be vertically, that can be in a jungle gym style. Here's what I like to say about promotion. People grow in different ways, and there's a model from Salesforce I absolutely love, which says that there are sort of 3 types of people in terms of their preference of growth within organizations. There are mountain climbers, adventure seekers, and deep sea divers. Mountain climbers are the folks who are very interested in taking on additional responsibility. They want to be in leadership roles. They tend to fit the traditional model of promotion. They want to scale the mountain. They want to get to the top. Not because necessarily of ambition or it's only a game to be won. They actually want that responsibility and are willing to take on the risks or downsides that come with it. Yes, they're front and center, but they're also willing to be the ones in the hot seat because of this drive and this purpose of helping in the way that they feel they can best contribute. Adventure seekers wouldn't mind a promotion. They like promotions, but not if that promotion is going to keep them stuck in one function or skill or way of doing things. Adventure seekers grow by working on many different kinds of projects. They don't want to feel stuck. They want to be able to try this, learn this, do this, work with this team. And that's how they feel like they're really moving forward. That's what progress means to them. Deep sea divers, drop me a line in the chat if you've seen the documentary Hero Dreams of Sushi. Sushi chef working on the perfect cut of fish for decades and decades and decades. Classic deep sea diver. Deep sea divers are folks who want to master their skill, their trade, their craft. They want to go deep on the thing that they feel passionate, compelled, interested in. And so those individuals, if you put them on an adventure seeker track, that's going to be really, really, really unsatisfying because they constantly have to switch. They're a master of none in that situation. Similarly, somebody who is a mountain climber wouldn't want to be on a deep sea diver track because there isn't that sense of progress of jumping to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing in the same way. Finally, in R2P2, we have protection. And protection is everything that makes employees feel safe. That could be policies, trainings, resources, tech, but it could be other things that allow for them to feel a sense of well-being at work. So this isn't just traditional compliance, it's what makes people feel like their needs are being met within reason based on their expectations of a workplace environment. So what I've done here is I've laid out across the about 145 organizations that my full service diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging firm, Ethos, has served, the top 3 interventions that have worked, especially when we think about inside organizations and we think about really hybridity and being in remote work environments where we know it's a lot harder to feel a sense of belonging. One of the reasons is because we don't have the same level of proximity. Another is that when we're mediated by screens, we tend to relate to others in different ways and may not have the tools or connective abilities to invest in relationships, but also just a lot of our processes and practices that may have existed before to create a sense of belonging don't work in the same ways. So when it comes to recruiting, going through a hiring practices audit and seeing how do we do things, how do we standardize, how do we make sure that it's not a totally different experience across multiple teams is really important. Something that you might uncover, for example, is that one team is using captioning software and another isn't. So if a participant in an interview is hard of hearing or deaf or is identifying as neurodivergent and needs captioning as an aid during a session, they may not have access to it. Overhauling your hiring and interviewing processes is also critically important in thinking through how they combine together and how your goals for hiring are actually translating into interviewing. Here's a really simple example. When we think about job descriptions, instead of having qualifications listing out 3-month and 6-month roadmaps of what people will be expected to do, the actual tasks and actions, we'll get a better sense of how well they will do the job, but also will be much more likely to have a diverse candidate pool because with qualifications, folks will self-select out, but with actions that they could perform, folks who know that they can do those things will apply. The last one here is creating a unified suite of culture reinforcing employee onboarding, performance evaluation, and promotion documents. Sounds really complicated. I'm going to try to boil it down to something simple. The scorecard that you use to decide if someone should join your organization, in my view, should be the same as the scorecard you use to evaluate existing employees. The fact that they're often different speaks to a disconnect between what we're bringing people in to do and what we then expect of them when they are here. When it comes to retention, pay equity continues to be something to pay attention to, and we should look at pay not just in terms of base pay, but also in terms of comprehensive benefits. One thing we know about pay transparency is that in the states where it's required, a lot of organizations actually uphold the pay equity gap by bonusing folks, by offering incentive pay, by offering different kinds of continuing education benefits to folks. And so thinking through how we look at total compensation across social identity types, this very much ties to the idea of employees want to feel valued, and if they don't feel valued, they won't feel a sense of belonging. Right-sizing jobs and setting maximum hours. One practice we do here at Ethos is we go through everybody's job descriptions with their teams, and we determine what's must-have versus nice to have, and we cross out everything that's nice to have. And then setting maximum hours. In many organizations, we have minimum hours. It's that you work a minimum of 37.5 hours to be considered full-time, but what about a maximum? This can help prevent burnout, since one of the 3 pillars of burnout is feeling overextended or exhausted. And then 360 feedback and career conversations are a way of really looking into deep sea divers, adventure seekers, mountain climbers, as well as getting a holistic and honest picture of people's performance. Promotion. What is your philosophy on how people grow and why? Capturing that, sharing it, making sure every single person understands it is critical to a sense of equity. And again, we know that in hybrid environments, there's a real challenge to that, because you are more likely to know based on your relationships than based on just information that's shared. So if 2 people are in the office together and one person's remote, the 2 people in the office together are more likely to know about things like promotion opportunities than the person who's remote. And it actually works vice versa. Succession planning, no matter how small your organization, is a valuable tool in making sure that you are thinking about representation and where you have the opportunities to invest in people who you have on the team and who you would want to bring onto the team. And then the reality is, I have spent a lot of time with other diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioners, and I was part of a 9-month belonging study through Sharehold. And this idea of healthy communication and conflict management is central to any sense of belonging. The pillar is listening. The answer is listening, as simple as that sounds. Protection. If you don't have an anonymous reporting system, we highly recommend it at Ethos to have one in place, because oftentimes the folks that we need to report to are the ones that we're reporting about. So eliminating that conflict of interest. Also having a microaggressions toolkit, so folks who are individually managing through situations know what to do, how to self-diagnose, how to respond. We very much recommend at Ethos, if you want to create a sense of belonging, you have to invest in relationships. And so yes, training and education is important, and they should happen in forum, discussion-based settings where folks can feel like they're building connections. And then a quarterly report. That's all about accountability. And one recommendation that I have here is, when you're doing quarterly reporting on people's experience of belonging, being able to segment by department, by level, and also by whether somebody is full-time in the office, hybrid, or full-time remote. And then in your communities, some things that can be useful to consider. Offering free programs for workforce development, working with your fellow colleagues to take the skills and knowledge that they have and develop and cultivate at work every day and share them with historically resilient groups. Recruit people onto the team because they've invested in things like belonging before, so looking for that in applications and interviews. And then making sure that you are creating multiple pathways into your organization, whether that's through paid apprenticeships or fellowships or other forms that would lead to that great sense of exposure. For retention, Work groups over committees, basically giving employees a project to work on versus a strategy to own. We're hearing a lot about committee members feeling exploited or without direction. And a big part of this is they have too much to focus on and own on top of their full-time jobs. So having one thing that they're focused on solving, resolving, is a good way of helping capitalize on their sense of commitment and engagement without asking more from them than is reasonable. Making sure that folks have a place to go outside of work for a sense of social wellness or healing. This is just simply by aggregating different resources and sharing them with people. And then making sure that folks from those historically resilient or marginalized groups have a place where they can develop their skills. And what I say by basic skills here is one question to seriously consider is, does every single person who works at your organization understand how your organization makes money? If the answer is no, then that would be a great program to run and lead, because if not, you have some folks who may be negotiating their promotions or raises based on that understanding, and others who, while are doing great work, may not have that understanding. Promotion, really making sure that you have opportunities for mentors and sponsors to invest in folks on your teams. And then the third piece here is actually measuring your mentors and sponsors by their outcomes. We tend to focus on the people who've been mentored. And what about the people mentoring them and what they are able to achieve? And then for protection, one, leaning into self-identification practices. In other words, making sure that people have an opportunity to name themselves before others name them. Making sure that folks know what it means and what expectations are around offering care or providing care within a workspace. And then just having some basic inclusive language guidelines or principles so folks are coming from a shared language. So my last piece here, before I hand it back over to Ayana, is how do you measure all of this stuff? Here's a long list. I'd be happy to talk about it more. But the point that I would like to make is that it's usually the first bullet point that we measure. And it's a good bullet point and shows us what our representation is. It's an easy count to pull. It's just not everything. So how many people you hired or from what identities they came from is something to measure, but also the velocity of how long did it take to hire them? How long did it take for them to be promoted? A few other scores, I do advocate for a BNPS, a belonging net promoter score, where you have one question that you ask on a quarterly basis about how people feel in terms of their expectation of belonging versus their experience. Again, with belonging, not everybody has to feel that they belong. It's just that what they want from belonging is something that is possible or attainable. And then some things that I would highlight here to think about a little bit more is how can you incorporate metrics or measurement in such a way that we're not only thinking about progress as being bigger or more, but also longevity, sustainability, and long-term maturation. So with all of that said, I went through so much content really quickly. I recognize that. And so I've got some key takeaways up here, but I do want to just note that I am always happy to answer questions, whether they're in session or via email. And as we go through our question and answer, I'll make sure to drop my email into the chat too.
Thank you so much, Alida. I was really excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you for sharing your insights and strategies on how we can, move towards making people, essentially feel like they belong in workspaces that were not, initially crafted for everybody to be in. And thank you to everyone who attended today. In case some people might hop out, I just want to plug Alida's accelerator program. Again, it's going to be March 9th and 10th. It's called my goodness, I'm lost in my notes. Cultures of Belonging, Creating Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategies and Initiatives Accelerator. I'm going to drop the link for it in our chat. There we go. Alida's 10 out of 10. And Alida's also fantastic because she gave us a great coupon code to use, Ethos Friends, which allows us to have $100 off our ticket, which I don't know about anybody else, but I love a good online coupon. And if you'd like to get to know more about Alida and her ideas, I really think it would be a great way to get to know her, as well as reading her new book. So yes, thank you, Alida. And I'm gonna open up the floor to some questions. I see a question that came in. Do you have experience in global projects? If so, how have you a view on the cultural differences and DEIB? I think that's a really good question.
Thank you for your question. So at Ethos, we actually have an Ethos International practice that is focused on this very issue. We have a lot of organizations that are working across the globe, and we have a session called Navigating Cultural Differences that's really focused on cultural awareness, because this idea that there's a way to be at work is fundamentally different, even just based on the country that you're in. So one of the things that I have facilitated before is we have a lot of clients who have offices in the US, the Netherlands, and Brazil, all at the same time. Those are some really different cultures in a variety of ways. So in the Netherlands, it's all be as direct as possible, be as blunt as possible, no filter on feedback. We just say what we mean, which in the US can come off as aggressive, and Brazil can come off as downright bullying because of differences around communication and expectations at work. In Brazil, there's a real culture of deference. We don't call out our leaders, we don't call out our managers, we try to create a sense of harmony. And in the US, they might say, well, you need to be more forthright in your feedback. We're developing a culture of continuous improvement. In the Netherlands, we might say, you're being disingenuous and dishonest, and you need to show up and tell the truth. And so some of the practices that are really important are having common values and expectations around what it looks like to do well, and then creating a space of everything else that's allowed essentially to be different, that is allowed to be stretchier or looser, but having those grounding principles and grounding language around them, and even having some agreements that we're going to use on a regular basis. I know it sounds really simple, but having agreed upon time zones that we're working in, times that we absolutely can't book meetings versus ones that we can when we're globally distributed, so that we're not always putting, let's say, our folks in the India office at dinner meetings to accommodate the schedules of folks in other places. So the question about how do we do work with global organizations or create belonging in global organizations, I think really comes down to getting very clear on what we expect, and then how we work together to make sure that those expectations are met. And then everything else is really about developing the competency of adjusting to different cultural contexts.
So thank you for the answer. I really do agree. It is, I bet it is very interesting to see what it's like in each different country. I know, for example, in Spain, everyone is very lackadaisical. So how you interact with people can be challenging. And I do think that's kind of a decent segue into our next question, which is, how can team events be sensitive to issues of belonging when people have so many different abilities, interests, relationships with food and backgrounds? How can we make sure we are being aware of what people are bringing to the table?
So there are a few ways to address this, but one of the things that I think can be really valuable is just ask. You can send anonymous pre-event questionnaires to folks about what would make it an accessible experience. When we have healing sessions at Ethos, this is something that's especially important to us because we're in a space of healing harm, so we don't want to reproduce or create new harm. So then we'll have folks who let us know some things that they might want or need to make the space accessible to them. The other thing is, one event isn't going to be everything to everyone. And so being more explicit with folks about what an event is for, what other events will exist, and what you will do in them is part of creating this sense of belonging. It's also helpful to know what kind of belonging am I trying to achieve. So there are 4 types of belonging. There's self-belonging, foundational belonging, societal belonging, and group belonging. Self-belonging is when we feel that we can show up as our authentic selves and be valued. That's like the Brene Brown kind of belonging, the kind of belonging she talks about, power of vulnerability, research around shame. So in this event, I can come, dress the way I like to dress, talking the way I like to talk, listening to music, making requests, that sort of thing. Group belonging is when we feel that in the group we participate in, we could ask for help and we would receive it. So that's a different kind of belonging. If I need something, I have people around me who will make sure that I am getting support, and I will do the same. With foundational belonging, we're talking about feeling totally interconnected to every other person on the planet. This is the sense that we're all human, so we're all connected. This is often harder to achieve in a work event than something like group or self-belonging, but where we tend to see it is in conversations about community or civic engagement, spirituality, volunteerism, service. And then finally, societal belonging is I feel that society accepts who I am and the groups I'm part of. And one of the things that I think organizations have been confronting is that people experiencing a lack of societal belonging has meant that they have made greater asks of the group. If you think about one of the things that has been coming up all the time, which is, do we release a statement about something that's taken place? Well, part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason employees are asking really explicitly for their organizations to release these statements is because their society is not meeting their belonging needs. So society is saying, you don't matter to me. We don't care about you. And so it becomes really urgent for employees to get that affirmation or validation from the organization that they're part of.
What advice do you have for vetting organizations for alignment with DEIB organizational best practices, e.g. signals, research, resources, and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of advice for vetting organizations, it depends on the context that you're vetting them in. So if you're looking to just see an organization from a pure audit standpoint, it would be a combination of surveying, focus groups, interviews to get a full holistic picture of where they fall according to R2P2. If you're an individual trying to see how good is this organization at DEIB, a lot of it comes down to what are the day-to-day routine activities and practices that they engage in. And this is not necessarily optical or tied to how they look. So in a book called When McKinsey Comes to Town, one of the things that they note is that McKinsey was embroiled in a lot of controversy because they have, in a variety of different ways, committed to being green, committed to sustainability and environmentalism, but actually they were opening up coal mines all over Australia at the same time. So the disconnect between the two created a real sense of disharmony within the organization. And so looking at not just what people say, but what they do in terms of these best practices, asking yourself from a recruiting standpoint, have they made this an inclusive experience? Have they provided me with transparent information? Have they made sure that I feel honored in my human dignity as I go through this process? In terms of how they make employees feel committed, does everyone have access to those resources, or is it only certain groups or certain people based on their relationships? Are there multiple growth pathways, and can people choose what they are? And in terms of safety, this is a really good time to talk to people at the organization and ask, do you feel safe here? What makes you feel safe here? What makes you feel well here? And that'll give you a good picture. The reality is most employees know what they need and know what they want, and it's how well an organization listens. And when they say no, what reasons they give, if they give any at all.
Thank you so much, Alida, for your time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for your questions. I feel like we could definitely go on and ask many more. Again, if you enjoyed what Alida has to say, feel free to check out her webpage and her upcoming events. Feel free to check out her new book. And if you enjoyed this Career Month webinar, be sure to come back this upcoming Monday for Entrepreneurship on the Menu, where you can hear from 3U Chicago alumni whose creative careers landed them in the wide world of food. And be sure to look out for an email from me with this session's recording and other resources mentioned here today, including the coupon code. So don't worry, got your back. And feel free to reach out to me, Alida, or Natalie if you have any more questions. Thanks for your time, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.